You don't owe these people a thing. You've already given them everything.
Not everything. Not yet. Alright, that ought to do it.
Welcome to 5 Points of Articulation. Today I'm taking a look at the DC Multiverse Dark Knight Rises Catwoman and Batpod to figure out if it's worth its $70 price tag or if it's another Catwoman heist. Starting with the packaging, and this is actually very similar to the box we looked at for Lobo and the Space Hog. We have an artistic representation of Catwoman on the Batpod, gold label and Dark Knight Trilogy logos in one corner, name and DC Multiverse logo in the other. On the top we get some helpful photos. They show us what the figure's supposed to look like and demonstrate her adjustable goggles. We even get another photo on the other side. Why, it's almost starting to feel more like a Mafex box. And then flipping around we get a glamour shot from the film and a photo to compare it to. Not having a window for something like a vehicle doesn't bother me, and I'm really impressed with just how much McFarlane showed off this time. For packaging, Catwoman and the Batpod get 5 points. Moving on to presentation, and Selina stands at 6 3/4 inches. Not counting gold label or platinum variations, this figure represents DC Multiverse's 4th Catwoman figure, and frankly, they just keep getting better and better. Zoe suffered from some wonky proportions and some very obvious joint cuts. Arkham City was a huge step up, but that one suffered from the diaper. Nightfall improved on those joints, but lacked the fun personality of Jim Balent's artwork and added extra details, creating problems for other figures using it as a base body. This one, however, is darn near perfect. Between the more subdued diaphragm cut and that belt hiding the diaper, the joints have been wonderfully integrated. Similar to Nightfall, I love the different finishes used between the bodysuit and the gloves and boots. That bodysuit has some phenomenal texture. Nostalgia for Michelle Pfeiffer aside, this is my favorite live-action Catwoman costume, mainly because it's a perfect combination of Nightfall and Hush. Well, until you get to the head. The domino mask and cat ears harkens back to Julie Newmar. Unfortunately, this version doesn't have the cat ears. For that, you're going to need the eBay exclusive Platinum Edition, but given that this is the version with the Batpod, the goggles do make sense, and I'll be talking about them more later. For my money, which in this case is a lot, the likeness is perfect. Between this and the Batman-Robin movie wave, I've been very impressed lately with McFarlane's portraits. Moving on to the Batpod, and I'm pretty impressed there too. Going into this review, I was concerned that its more spindly frame was going to be fragile and delicate, or that it might be kind of soft and gummy like some of their staffs and tridents. I'm happy to report that it's nice and sturdy. Additionally, the tires are nice and wide, so it does remain relatively balanced, if not leaning a bit to one side. The tires are also rubber, which is always a nice feature. For the most part, it's just solid black and silver pieces, but those guns that Bruce hates so much do have some dry brushing. For presentation, I'm giving Catwoman and the Batpod 5 points. Moving on to posability, and this Selina really surprises me. From the top, and of course her head's at a dumbbell joint, and of course that long beautiful hair gets in the way. Not too much though, as it has been sculpted away from her neck. Because of that, she can look down with no trouble. She also has a really good tilt for when she wants to give Bruce the side eye. And of course all the way around. Moving down, her arms come to just under 90 degrees. She does have a rotator cuff though, very nicely integrated into the bodysuit. And speaking of nicely integrated articulation, the bicep swivel is at the glove. Her elbows are double jointed and bend perfectly, and of course those wrist balls can swivel and hinge in any direction. Shifting back to the torso, and we've already talked about the diaphragm joint and dumbbell waist. Seeing it in action though, she can arch back this far and hunch forward this far, which isn't great, but better than usual. Of course she gets a great amount of tilt. Just keep in mind if you go too far it looks a bit wonky. Below the diaper hiding belt, and she has the typical McFarlane hips. She can kick about 90 degrees and do a perfect split. I regret to inform you though that she has no twist in the hip whatsoever, but that's okay. Why? Because this Catwoman has thigh cut. Until I got this figure in hand, I had absolutely no idea, and it is a fantastic surprise. Generally speaking, McFarlane only does this on figures that are intended to ride motorcycles, but personally I feel like anytime a character has a boot or some kind of line like this that can hide the joint, you should go for it. Traveling down that leg, and she has double jointed knees with a perfect bend, toe articulation, and ankle balls that can swivel, hinge, and like Catwoman herself from good to bad, pivot. There is an additional point of articulation in her head, which we'll talk about in the next category, and as for the Batpod, well, The wheels turn. For posability, I'm giving Catwoman and the Batpod 5 points. Moving on to playability, and we have a trading card and a figure stand. This is that same glamour shot we saw in the box, and it actually specifies being both Catwoman and the Batpod. It's just a synopsis of The Dark Knight Rises, but if you'd like to read it, well, pause here. Otherwise, all Catwoman comes with is a pair of open hands. This in contrast to the Platinum Edition, which comes with a plethora of accessories, including 2 more hands, Martha's necklace, and Batman's shattered mask. Though I suppose you could say the Batpod is itself a kind of accessory. Otherwise, though, lest we forget her goggles. They are a separate piece and designed to be posable, allowing her to pull them down and be wearable. Of course, with those goggles down, there's nothing left to do but put her on the Batpod. Using the elbow pads and the knee pads as a guide, this was the best I was able to do. Not exactly a perfect fit, but it gets the job done. Fortunately, she doesn't have any trouble holding onto the handlebars. A nice additional feature is that the hair does have that windswept look. That said, this is the Batpod and not the Catpod, so I'm sure you're curious about the Dark Knight himself. And unfortunately, I've got bad news, badder news, and worst news. The bad news is that if you have the single-carded Build-A-Bane version, he only comes with one open hand, meaning he can only grip one of the handlebars. The badder news is that if your Batman came from the Ultimate Movie 6-pack, he doesn't have any grip hand, so he can't hold on to it at all.
I can ride my pod with no handlebars.
And the worst news is that the only Dark Knight Batman with 2 grippy hands is the Platinum version, which is notoriously hard to get. That said, if you are willing to do some part swapping, you can get the unmasked one and swap those hands. As long as you don't care about screen accuracy, you can always swap out with Pattinson. For $70 though, I feel like they could have thrown in a couple of Batman hands. Fortunately, playability is more than just accessories. It's also about how well your figure plays with others. Kicking things off with some fellow Dark Knight Trilogy alumni, and here she is with Bane.
Everyone talks about your singing in Les Miserables, but I've been a big fan of yours ever since Ella Enchanted.
Oh, well, thank you.
You have a lovely, lovely voice.
And then moving backwards in villainy, here we have Harvey Dent, also known as Two-Face, Heath Ledger's unforgettable Joker, and someone I think I'm gonna miss most of all. Of course, until we get that Talia al Ghul figure with instant death action, the most important comparison we have is the Dark Knight himself. But since Batfleck never got a Catwoman of his very own, here we have Ben as he appeared in Justice League, and the all-new Affleck from Batman v Superman Dawn of Justice. For a live-action Gotham City Sirens, and here we have Harley Quinn from Suicide Squad and Poison Ivy from Batman and Robin. But for those who want to turn this Catwoman into more of a comic-style version, here we have Arkham City. Looking at a head swap, and this is great. If I had a spare of each figure, this would probably be my definitive comic Catwoman. Not only that, but Nightfall Catwoman's claw hands are a perfect fit. The fact that they're also glossy makes them an even better match. You can also use Nightfall Catwoman's whip. For those who do want a customizer for their general Batman shelf, and here we have the Arkham City Penguin, the Arkham City Riddler, and then for the Joker, here we have the one from Mortal Kombat 11, and the clown version from 3 Jokers. Joker brings us to Batman and to the most important comparisons. In order of release, and here we have Arkham City. Next is the ever-popular 3 Jokers version. Next up is DC Rebirth, which in general is small, but I think given that she's in heels, this does work. For more realistic Batman, and here we have Page Punchers. Next up is Arkham City, which I know a lot of you love. Here we have the black and gray version of Hush. And lastly, the blue and gray version of Nightfall. For a roll-to-scale comparison, here's Selina Kyle with Pizza Spidey and the Spectacular Spider-Man. And as always, here she is with Stealth Iron Man. Between the adjustable goggles, alternate hands, and of course the head swap potential, there's a lot of play value in this set. As a courtesy to those of us with the previous Christian Bale figures, I do think they should have included Batman's hands, but for playability, I'm giving Catwoman and the Batpod 4 points. This leaves us with nothing left to discuss but the price, and I've got a question. What is $70 worth really? This set was $70, but Lobo and the Space Hog, which was a lot more plastic and painting, was only $5 more. $75 is also what the 1989 Batman and Batmobile retail for on Amazon. Don't get me wrong, I like this set, but it's not worth a Batmobile. Between the figure and what other Batcycles go for, this should have only been $50. $55 at the most. Add to that the frustration of having to buy a completely separate Catwoman figure to get all of her accessories. A Catwoman Catwoman figure that's very exclusive and hard to find, I might add, and this feels less like a steal and more like being robbed. For price, I'm giving Catwoman and the Batpod 3 points, averaging out to a final total of 4.4 out of 5. Did you order this set, and if not, was it because of the price or because you just weren't interested? Sound off in the comments, and while you're down there, tell me your favorite live-action Catwoman. If you like this video, check out one of these. Thank you so much for watching. I'll be back again real soon, but until then, play nice and have fun.